There we are. Okay, so this is me when I was in fourth grade. We didn't have very many pictures of us, but this one survived. And I just wanted to show you because, I was just a kid like any other kid. And I had a lot of deep thoughts about things. And so I started writing poetry, and I wasn't doing it for school assignments. For some reason, we didn't do that when I was in school. But this shows you why I started writing uh, picture books instead of just writing poetry. And these are my granddaughters when they were 4 and 6. But it took me a very long time to get this first book published. They are now 12, and my older granddaughter just turned 15 yesterday. So it took a long time. Uh, but hopefully the other books I've written won't take quite as long. So this is Child of the Flower Song People, Luz Jiménez, daughter of the Nahua. And it is illustrated beautifully by Duncan Tonatiuh. I'm so honored that he agreed to illustrate this book because he usually writes his own and illustrates them. So it's a really big honor for me. But the way that his very unique style of the pre-Columbian art fit the text perfectly. And so I'm really glad that he did that. So this is a biography about a real person, Luz Jiménez. And so I wanted to show you a little bit of the real person. Here she is modeling for some artists. And here is Luz Jiménez, a little older, with her only child, Concha. And a photographer also took a famous photographer also took photos of Luz Jiménez. I want to show you as well, and I hope you can see it. I don't know if can you see it pretty well? Luz's grandson, Jesus Villanueva Hernandez, I was in contact with him, and he gave me some resources, and here he is by a painting of his grandmother by Diego Rivera. And he is such a gracious person. He stayed with me the whole 8 years it took to get this published, and was just, and still is, very, very supportive. And so I'm very glad I got to know him, and he's done much in his life to try to keep her story alive. And so I'm so glad that this book is also doing that and reaching more people. Okay, I don't know why it does this, but let's see. Okay, here's another where she is in a painting by Fernando Leal. There she is in the upper left-hand corner. And another one where she is in this painting. You can see that they represent her in different ways. So because they're the artists and she is the model, and so they do that however they feel it should be. And here she is in another one by Diego Rivera, La Tortillera. Okay, I want to talk about the Aztecs and the Nahua, because a lot of people think the Aztecs disappeared. Well, they didn't disappear. They actually are the Nahua descendants. The Nahua are the descendants of the Aztecs. And a lot of people think of pyramids, or they think of these glyphs or pictures that represent ideas or gods or sounds or events. But they didn't disappear. They have these descendants, and they call themselves Nahua. Now, in the book, I use both Aztec to represent the older civilization and use Nahua to represent the modern civilization. And the people themselves did not call themselves Aztec. They called themselves by their tribal name or their place name, and someone else gave them the name Aztec. So I want you to know that, even though most people think of it as Aztecs. And here's another thing that people think of when they think of Aztecs. And this is a very colorful image that you might have see some, if you've seen any of the dancers in a celebration, they have feathers and so on. And that kind of comes from this. Okay, I also use the word flower song and Xochicuicatl. Xochicuicatl is Nahuatl for flower song or song of the flowers, because the Aztecs did not have a written language. They used glyphs or pictures, small pictures. Those were images. They were what you could visualize, what you could draw. So flower plus song means poetry, beautiful poetry. And so Xochicuicatl means that, and it's repeated in the book, both in English and in Nahuatl. But I just wanted you to know that before we get started, because you'll see that. And this book is really about culture. It's about family, about the things that make you who you are, which is the language and your history and the stories you hear and what you believe and what you value and the food and the music and the community. So let's think about what that means to you and what it is that is treasured or important to Luz Jiménez as we go along. So before we get started. All right, now we're going to read the book. And I won't be reading all of it, but I'll be reading most of it. There's some parts I'm just going to leave out because it's a biography. It's longer than most picture books. A girl stared at the stars sprinkling the hammock of sky. Like many other nights, she listened to the whisperings of the ancient Aztecs in the wind. She heard their Xochicuicatl, their flower song. She listened as the elders repeated tales their grandfathers had told, tales their grandfathers' grandfathers had told, how sacred streams and mountains protect them, how the Nahua lost their land to Cortez the Conqueror and to the Spaniards who followed him. She was Luz Jiménez, child of the flower song people, the powerful Aztecs who called themselves Nahua, who lost their land, but who did not disappear. Now, I love that face in the clouds. Do you see that? It represents the ancient Aztecs telling the stories, and she hears that and thinks of it. So look for that image as we continue. It does come up again. In Milpa Alta, a village slung between two mountains, Luz's father harvested maguey and corn. She watched closely as her mother taught her how to grind corn in a metate, how to twist yarn with her toes, how to weave on a loom. She hummed as she worked, words glowing and swirling in her head in the Aztec language, Nahuatl. This was life for the Nahua, and Luz soaked it all in. Now think about what's important to Luz. Look at all the things that she's learning from her mother about being a Nahua, and see if you can remember how this shows up later. But she's learning all these things about her culture. Evenings by the fire, Luz listened eagerly to stories about how Monetzin, betrayer of the Aztecs, was swept to the top of a mountain where she cries in the wind at night, pulling her long black hair. Now, Monetzin has many names, Malinche, Marina, and she's thought of as a betrayer to the Aztecs because she helped Cortez the Conqueror, but she's also thought of as the mother of Mexico because their son was both part native and part Spanish and is the first mestizo, which is what the majority of people in Mexico are. They're a combination of the native and the Spanish. So she's also thought of as the mother of Mexico. Luz wove all these old stories into her heart. Through them, she tasted bitter sorrow, how the Nahua suffered, and sweet joy, how her people survived. Luz was a child of the flower song people. Mornings on the way to market, Luz and her mother passed a teacher's house. Students bent over reading. Luz carried an empty place inside. She yearned to know what was written on the papers. A secret longing began to bud in her heart. The secret fluttered lightly like wings in her chest. She would study hard. She would learn what the squiggles meant. She would learn to read. But Luz, like the other native people, was a forgotten shadow to those who governed. There was no public school for them. Now, can you imagine? They had to pay, like the students there on the left side, they had to pay and go to the teacher's house to be schooled in a private school. And so, you know, we're all fortunate that we have public schools that all students can attend. Now, do you remember when you first started to read? Because most kids want to know how to read. And think about how you began to learn to read. Well, Luz wants this so much. And at that time, there was no public school for her. Then suddenly, the government offered free schooling. No, required it to turn the native children into modern ones, like the descendants of the Spanish who ruled the country, who thought only their ways were right and proper. So this is really an important change, and it affects Luz greatly. Mornings, Luz learned from Spanish school books. Afternoons, she studied dressmaking, drawing, and baking bread, not the corn tortillas of her people. Luz excelled and won many prizes, and her voice sparkled as she told Nahua stories in secret to other children. If the students spoke Nahuatl instead of Spanish, the teachers punished them. They had to give up their Nahua clothes, wear modern ones like in the cities. The budding flower in Luz's heart might have withered, but it did not. So you can see how she's changed her clothes and all the different things that she's learning that are different than what her culture had previously. These new rules were changing the Nahua, but Luz was different. She longed to blossom, carrying the beautiful traditions of her people with her. Luz found strength in remembering how Teutli, not wanting to let his daughter go, turned her and the young man she loved into mountains. Ixtaccíhuatl, sleeping lady, and Popocatépetl, smoking mountain. How the mountains protected the people and brought precious rain. Luz was a child of the flower song people. She wanted to protect the Nahua ways. So here, Duncan Tonatiuh illustrates Ixtaccíhuatl, the sleeping lady, and Popocatépetl, her love, and how important the mountains are to the people where she lives. So there are many stories about them, many versions, and this is just a little part of that. Her body tingling, Luz spilled her secret to very few. I want to be a teacher when I grow up. Her secret yearning was beginning to bloom, imagining teaching future generations. But at 13, her dream whirled away in a storm. The Mexican Revolution came to Milpa Alta. Soldiers stole their food. They burned her precious home and school to rubble. Her father, like nearly all of the men, was shot and killed. Luz and her mother and sisters fled to Mexico City at night, stars lighting the way. Others followed. Luz said, not a soul was left. Wow. First of all, we have another dream that Luz has besides learning to read. She did learn to read, but she had another dream, and that was to be a teacher. But when the Mexican Revolution came, well, that kind of disappeared. So her life has changed a great deal, and she has to go to a new place she's never been. And maybe some of you have had to move and go to a new place. What do you think they're going to do now? They don't have their father. It's her mother, and she's the oldest girl, and there are 6 of them. So this is a really difficult thing. So let's see what happens when they get to Mexico City. She and her mother and sisters sold weavings and food, and the city had many new things, and they were trying to figure out how to make a living. And so Luz finds something new. So can you imagine how she felt now, trying out things so that it could help her mother and her sisters? So let's turn the page and see what she found. She found a job posing for artists drawn to her strong features, her sturdy body, her large dark eyes. As she posed, she taught them the gifts she had learned from her beginnings: grinding corn in a metate, twisting yarn with her toes, weaving on a loom. Luz was a natural model and teacher. She understood what the artist needed without being told. Now, can you tell that these are some of the things she learned when she was a child? These are things that her mother taught her. They're part of her culture. And so what is in here are some of the things that are in the artwork and in the photographs. Artists until then had painted the Spanish heritage of Mexico, the light-skinned Europeans and their religious beliefs. But these artists of the 20th century honored the native people who had been colonized by the Spanish, stripped of their language and culture, shamed and mistreated. Now, she didn't let that get her down. So don't you let other people make you feel small and unwanted. Luz didn't. In whatever situation, don't let anybody do that to you. Luz represented her people well through her indigenous features, her skills, and being true to her roots. Luz became the most well-known model in all of Mexico for artists like Diego Rivera, Fernando Leal, Tina Modati, Jean Charlot, and others. Painters painted, photographers clipped, sculptors carved. The world recognized the beauty and strength of the native people after 500 years of being in shadows. Through Luz, the world came to know the spirit of Mexico. Though many artists sought out Luz, her heart still longed to teach. After the revolution, Luz returned to Milpa Alta and applied to be a teacher. But without being given a reason, Luz was rejected. Once again, her dreams seemed to swirl away forever like petals on the wind. But in the city, she had become friends with artists and scholars. Those scholars wanted to learn Nahua culture. They wanted to learn Nahua language. They wanted to go to Milpa Alta. So Luz at last became a teacher, weaving the threads of her flower song, Xochicuicatl, her language and culture, into their hearts. And I love this spread of this festival. Eagerly, she led anthropologists and artists on tours of Milpa Alta. There, she showed them how the Nahua knew good mushrooms from bad, which Popote made strong brooms, how they use herbs for medicine. Luz also took them to Chalma, where the visitors watched native festival dancers and worshipers who would walk for days to place candles or flowers at the church. Luz brought to life the world of the native Mexican people and their pride in their culture and roots. So these are all parts of her culture too, the things that she cared about. Inspired by Luz's teachings, the artist painted, the scholars wrote. Luz was a powerful woman of the flower song people. Luz told her tales to a college professor, Fernando Oracasitas, an anthropologist. She wrote down what she patiently told him. He wrote down what she patiently told him in Nahuatl, word by word, phrase by phrase, week by week. And look at this head again. It's full of Nahuatl. I love that this is filled with Nahuatl. And the professor wrote down what she was writing phonetically. That means just by the sounds, because they didn't have a standard written language, and it had been in pictures and so on. They had a language, of course, and that was the Nahuatl, but it hadn't been written down except by the religious people long ago, and they'd written it down in their language. So there were stories written down in the codices, but not Luz's story and what she had lived through and the stories that she knew. Luz was a living link to the Aztecs, her words published in books to teach future generations the language of her people. Professor Oracasitas asked her to help him teach Nahuatl at the College of Mexico City. Like the mountains, Ixtixtihuatl and Popocatépetl, she protected the dying Nahua culture. Her memories were some of the precious few written in the lively voice of one of their own as it was disappearing in the wind. And another thing I love in this illustration, she's speaking and there are these gray shapes, and then they become flowers, and then they become colorful flowers, and then they're planted at the feet of the students and they bloom there. And that's what happens when teachers teach students. You as a student are able to make those flowers that are sent to you bloom yourself. At long last, Luz's heart bloomed fully. Her dream of being a teacher had come true in more ways than the young girl gazing at the sprinkled stars could ever have imagined. Just by being Nahua, just by being herself, Luz breathed life into Xochicuicatl, the flower song of the Nahua, and carried their fading voice into the future. And as you look at this, you can see that it's in future times. Look at the buildings, look at the kids, the soccer ball or a football, and the scooter. So there is that face again. The stories are still alive. So one of the main things I want you to remember is that Luz is very proud of her culture. She didn't let anyone shame her or lose that culture. And the main thing I want to leave you with is be proud of who you are. Be proud of being yourself, because you have all kinds of possibilities in front of you. And there's some back matter, but I won't go into that. There's just more information. So now maybe we'll have some questions or we'll just see what happens next, but I will stop sharing and